All right, let's take a look at this image. Here it is right out of the camera, a rather dark image, dark cloudy day, definitely underexposed. You can see on the histogram here that a lot of room to move it to the right. Again, this is taken with an R5, so there is a lot of dynamic range to play with, and we'll see that when we start to make our corrections. So let's move to see what our Lightroom corrections were. And here you see that we've gone from 5800, which was the ash shot, to 6500, the cloudy setting. We've upped the exposure almost 3/4 of a stop, 0.7, moved the histogram to the right, added a little, open up the shadows just a little bit, and moved the whites over there as well. And the only other thing we really did was up the vibrance, take down the sharpening all the way, because we're going to add sharpening over in Photoshop, and then we're going to take out or we're going to enable the lens profile and remove chromatic aberration. So let's take a look at the Photoshop file when we move it over there. Here it is blown up. We can move it back to there. There you see the original image from Photoshop. We zoom in some so we can see what the change we're going to do here. First step is to run the Topaz sharpening plugin. And here is the change. So I'm going to zoom in just a little bit more, and you can see the difference hopefully on the screen. Pretty dramatic difference. So how did we do that? Well, what you do is go up here to Filter, Topaz Labs. We're going to open the Sharpen. Takes a few seconds for it to open, so we'll wait for that to happen. All right, so the image is opened in Sharpen. We can move that to get a little better. The bird itself, and I have it in the split view, so what we're seeing is corrected on this side, uncorrected on that side. And so if we move this slider, you'll see what we saw before. And this is on the auto setting, so we're increasing the sharpness 45, noise suppression 41, and there are several settings up here that I want to discuss. Sharpen I rarely use. I have it set for default on Stabilize. So Stabilize is going to correct for some of the micro movements that you make. Even if you have a stabilized lens, the R5 has in-body stabilization and the lens head stabilization. And then the other option is Focus. So if you miss your focus by a little bit, it can help a lot. So what I tend to do is leave it on Stabilize, run it, and then go and run auto. And here we see the focus, and then we can compare them. So if you go back and forth here, there's not a big difference on this one, but it is worth running both of them and looking and see which one gives you the better image. And typically Stabilize is more aggressive, and it'll do a better job most of the time. But very often it leaves artifacts. And where you see artifacts, and we'll just zoom out here a little bit so we can see, sometimes up in the sky, if you've done anything up in there, it can really make a difference. And so we'll cancel out of this because we've already done this step, but I would encourage you to do both, but check to make sure that Stabilize is not too aggressive and that you're happier with the focus. And you really have to search around the image and just double check. So that is Sharpen. So now that it's sharpened, again, let's just take a quick look at that. We're going to do another trick that was taught to me, and I've talked about it before, which is use the unsharp mask function. So here is, we'll zoom in maybe a little bit, and we'll just turn it on and off, and then we'll run it. You can see that there's quite a difference, not only in the sharpness, but it's really apparent sharpness, because what it's doing is applying a lot of micro contrast adjustments. So there it is. There, we take it off. It's not something that I would encourage you to do on the whole image, although we're going to do it on this image just to make it easier. But again, you can see the difference that it makes. So how do we run that? We start here, go up to filter again, sharpen, unsharp mask. The settings are 65 for amount, 15 for radius, which is normally you're down here in the 1 and 2, threshold of 0. So that gets you this very aggressive look that we're seeing here. What I normally do is then put the Option or Alt key down and put a mask on this, an all black mask, and then paint in where I want that extra contrast. Typically that would be around the bird's beak and eye, maybe sometimes on the wings. Rarely would I do it on the whole image, but for sake of this, we'll do the whole image here. You can see it even really sharpens up the Norfolk Island pine bows here. It typically also adds a lot of noise. And we'll talk about the noise here in a moment. But when you run this, you're going to need to run denoise after this to get some of the noise out. There's this argument about when you run denoise, do you start off running it or do you run it near the end? If you're going to use this technique, you're going to need to run it near the end. So the image is looking a lot more contrasty and a little better. Our next step is to stamp it by creating a merge up layer, where it consolidates or merges all the layers but to a layer above, and then make that into a smart object, and then we're going to apply the Camera Raw filter. So here's Camera Raw. We'll open it up, and of course that's just another version really of Lightroom. And so when that opens up, so what did we do here? On the basic side, we up the dehaze. And so if you take the dehaze down, you can see that we brought back in some of the sky. And you can go too far and obviously, it looks kind of crazy. So I think we're at 24, 25. The other thing we did on this is down in the color mixer, we upped the saturation of the blue a little bit, maybe took down the brightness of the blue, the luminance rather. So that's really the only change we did on that. We made one more adjustment, stamped another new layer. So we merged everything up again and used something that I do often earlier in the image, but on this particular image, we did it at this point, and that's to brighten up some of the shadows and tone down some of the highlights. You can see that particularly up here, some of those highlights are still a little blown out. This is still not to my liking. So that is, we took that layer and ran an image adjustment. So under adjustments, shadows and highlights, you can see that it defaults to this kind of crazy shadows. We back that off quite a bit. And we use the highlights. So this is like another version of shadows and highlights in Lightroom, but I find it to be a lot more accurate than the shadows and highlights in Lightroom. And I often take the image from Lightroom over into Photoshop, and this is the first. I duplicate the layer, apply an adjustment layer here of the shadows and highlights, and correct it to my liking. And as you can see, it does make quite a bit of difference here. So we'll cancel out of that. So that was the change that was made there. And I only really wanted that on the bird. So how do we do that? How do you make this mask? Let's take a look at this mask. So there's the mask of only the bird. So how do we make that? Well, we'll use this layer just as a demonstration layer. One way to do it is to go up to Select and select the subject. And let's see what it does. Takes a second. If we go to Select and Mask so we can see what it did, we see that it, all right, did a pretty good job of selecting the bird. There's some problems up here in the wingtips. It missed all the tail feathers, and we could certainly use the tools over here to improve our selection. And that's normally what I had been doing. With the newest version of Photoshop, they added the sky replacement tool, and that's over here under Edit, Sky Replacement. But we're not going to replace the sky. We're going to use this new tool, which is Select Sky. So that goes, and let's see what it does. Amazingly, it does a terrific job of selecting the sky. Now we want to select the bird and the tree limbs, so we would invert that. And it does an almost perfect job. There's very little you need to correct. There's some correction that happens up here. Typically what I see happening, particularly on ospreys, is down in the tail feathers where there's this white and you're up against a white sky. It, masks that, so you have to go back in and, just take your tools and mask that out, or actually mask it in, so that you can see it. So that's a really quick and really helpful, particularly on any image where there's a lot of sky. So that's how we created this mask. On our next step, and that was just for a demonstration, that layer, our next step is to do a curves adjustment, because I still wasn't happy with the brightness of the image. And so here's the curves adjustment, and it's clipped to that layer below and that particular mask. So you can see we brightened it up just a little bit. Still not quite where I want it. So we'll do a brightness and contrast image, and you can see that that really gets it to just about the right area. And again, that's using the mask of the bird to restrict that change of brightness and contrast to just the bird. And at this point, I think we're pretty much done. And so at this point, we would run Topaz denoise. So let's do that. And again, we'll create a stamped layer here and run Topaz denoise very quickly. And we'll spend some more time on a more obvious image. This one does not have a lot of noise, but if we were to zoom in there, you would see it. Again, I would just, I find that AutoWorks is a good starting point. And let it do its thing there. We'll move this over. Where you want to look for noise, definitely in the shadows. And you can see that it sharpened it quite a bit. We'll move this. You can see that there is an improvement in sharpening, but the bigger improvement is over here on the noise. And this is a good starting point, but there's still some noise, and so I would bump this up. I ended up bumping it up all the way to 23 and this to 43. It's a matter of taste, and it is a matter of moving this around and looking, and you can see still a little artifacting there, but not bad. And so that we'll get rid of that layer. And this is the result of that. So you won't be able to see that, but a big improvement in the noise. We'll have another example later that shows a lot more what Topaz denoise can do. And then as the final change to this image, really the only thing is I'm not real happy with the eye. And so I put a dodge layer in there. A dodge layer allows you to lighten a particular tool. You can use the dodge tool, or you can create a layer and just use white paint. And you'll see that we're on this layer. We're in the overlay mode, and watch the eye. You can see we just used the brush tool to apply that, dodging right to the eye, and you can see the difference that it makes in the overall image. We also lighten the tree bows down here at the bottom. Makes a big difference. So that's it for this image, and let's move on to the next one. We'll take any questions about this, but let's move on to the next image.